Right on the set. Take one.
Welcome to another episode of the Uncharted podcast. Today, my guest is Mr. Tim Perkins, and today we're going to be diving into what a day in his life at his job is, what he does, and a few things that you can learn if you want to get into the industry he is. And without further ado, welcome Tim Perkins.
Well, thank you. Okay, so in June of 1977, long before you were born, I'm graduating high school.
Okay.
And in my mind, I am going to go to the University of Louisville in the fall of 77 and start my education for becoming a doctor. I'd always said I'm going to become a doctor. It didn't take me long at the University of Louisville to determine that's not for me. It just, the study and the work was not rewarding, you know? So I changed majors 2 or 3 times. Nothing was working. And I can remember to this day standing outside the office of the counselor waiting for him to show up so I could change majors again. And I'm unhappy with anything. And I just decided I'm not going to go to school again until I know what I want to do. So I just walked out and left. And so that's like early January.
Gotcha.
And this is long before the internet. So how do you find out what schools offer? You call up the admissions, you ask them to mail you a course catalog, which tells you the classes. Yeah, it's so different than it is today. You get the list of courses and their majors and what it takes and all that. And I came across a little business college. That's what it was called at the time. Business colleges were kind of popular. It's become an archaic term, and they don't really exist. I mean, they offered 2-year programs. You get an associate in arts and whatever. And it talked about computer programming, and I was kind of fascinated. So I go up there, and I tell them I'm kind of interested. Oh, well, Mr. Perkins, we're going to give you an aptitude test to determine if this would be right for you. So I take the test, and of course they come out, oh, you were born to be a programmer kind of thing. That should have been my first clue. Thing you got to remember about a business college, they're a business first.
That's right.
Then they're a college.
Yes.
And they cost more than like a local, like university. My first year at the University of Louisville, first semester, tuition and books, a total of $600. I mean, that's outrageous by today's standards, right? But they were even more costly because they were a private school trying to make a living. So anyway, I take out a student loan, I go through it, and I did do well. I found that this worked for me, programming did. And I graduated in about 18 months. And the reason I've always thought that programming appealed to me, it kind of satisfied 2 things I liked. One is creativity. Because, people think, well, how's coding creative? Well, if you're given a problem to say, figure out how to get the computer to do this, well, now you're going to have to be creative as to how do you figure out how to get it. And not only how to get it, but how's the best way.
Exactly.
You pride yourself on this is the best way to get at it. So there's the creativity aspect. And the other was just the simple logic of thinking through a problem step by step and building the solution. So it kind of appealed to me in those 2 levels, and that's why I've always liked being a programmer. So I graduated from Watterson College in early 1982. Yeah.
How many years did it take you to do that?
About 18 months because I had a lot of credits from U of L transfer over.
I got you.
That's why I could do that. I'll just throw this one little story in. At my graduation, I'm not going to get into the long story about what happened, but I felt robbed by something that the administration did. Kind of bothered me they did it. So, okay. So at my graduation, when I walked up on stage to accept my diploma, I had a joy buzzer in my palm. And I shook hands with the president and gave him quite a shock as I took my diploma. And then I went to my seat, and of course he stared at me the rest of the ceremony. But I'm thinking, big deal. I got my diploma. The last thing you did at that college is you did an internship, which turned out to be useful, so you get some real-world experience. And the coveted position was KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. This is long before they become Yum. So they were still their own corporation. They had their headquarters here in Louisville, off Gardner Lane. And so I would go there during the semester 2 or 3 days a week and do real-world work in IT, learn how it all works. And that was such a benefit to get to go there because I was being mentored by a guy named John, and I think the last name was McCrory, but I'm not certain. Anyway, after I graduated and started passing out resumes, and I'm just trying to find any IT shop in Louisville I can to find a job, I sent one to Brown and Williamson Tobacco. Since you're not from Louisville, I'll tell you, tobacco used to be really big in Louisville.
Okay.
At one time, we had 4 different tobacco manufacturers in Louisville. So Brian Williamson was still here, and I get interviewed, and one of the people that interviewed me knew this John McCrory from when they were at KOC, and they had a lot of respect for him. So they figured if John says Tim is good, Tim's good. Well, that was wonderful because that opened the door for me to get in Brown & Williamson Tobacco.
Yeah.
Now, they were a typical mainframe shop, which most places were using COBOL to write code and all that, but they were different. They were using a language called PL1, and I don't know if that language is used by anybody. It's a good language, but they weren't hiring me to become a standard mainframe developer. The trouble with mainframe development those days is if you needed something from them, you go down, you explain what you need. If you got it inside of 6 months, you were lucky because just how the way project work worked. So they said, we got to have a faster way. Yeah. So they developed their own little internal group they called the Information Center, where they were going to have 2 or 3 people who could work with specialized tools to get these reports done much quicker for the business users. And so obviously they were just looking for a cheap college graduate, somebody they don't have to pay that much. And that's how I got my foot in the door, and I had to start learning tools and technologies I'd never been trained in, but they figured he'll learn. And I did learn. Databases were not real big yet in the 80s. But there was one that was real big in the 80s that came from Germany, and it was called by a company named Software AG. They had a database called Adabase, and its own proprietary language that was called Natural. And not many companies were using it. But I learned throughout my career at Brown & Williamson, which was 12 years, I was always working around that technology. So to be honest, I got quite good at it. Now, here's a little admonition for anybody in IT. If you get real good at a specialized kind of technology that's not used a lot, keep in mind that if you don't work where you're at, are there other places in your local community where you can work if you're wanting to stay there? Because that came to bite me later. So after 12 years, I'm with Brown & Williamson, and in 1994, what we didn't know was Brown & Williamson was in talks with American Tobacco to merge. And when companies merge, you discover you don't need 2 of everything. So somebody's got to go.
Yep.
So in February 1994, they said, thanks, Tim, but no thanks. Here you go. Now, I will give them credit. They did give me a very generous severance, a continuation of health care, and an outplacement service that taught you how to get back into the workforce, how to find that next job.
I got you.
Once again, internet's not around at this point. So you've got to make all these networking connections, try to call people, see what they know, give them your resume. And there was only 2 other places that used Adabase Natural. Whatever you've done the most, that's how you're viewed. Regardless of anything else you say and you might know it fairly well, whatever you work the most in, well, that's what you are.
Exactly.
If you worked in pastries, then you're a pastry chef. Whether you can do anything else with cooking, you're a pastry chef. So I was seen as having that skill set. And only 2 other places in Louisville used that skill set that I knew of. One was actually kind of like a myth. They said this company was out there, but nobody could tell you the name of it. They weren't sure. And the other one was a company named Vermont American. I'm not even sure if Vermont American's still around. But they were a national company that made saw blades. Anything that cut wood, they were into. And they're a story for another time because I went to an interview there. It was the weirdest interview I've ever been on. It'd be a whole nother topic, just what that was. So here I am, no prospects, trying to figure out what to do. I'm laid off in February. I didn't even start working again until November. Thank goodness the severance was that good. And I think God sent me my angel that helped me. I get a call out of the blue from a guy named Tom Glover. Never met the guy, didn't know the first thing about him, but he somehow found out I knew Natural Database. And he had a client looking for somebody that could do that. So he sets me up to go on an interview with an airline in Indianapolis named American Transair. And I go up there and we interview and it went well. And I come back home to Louisville and get a call a few days later. Tim, they liked you, but they can't bring you on because they don't have any more money in their budget for contracting services. Okay, thank you very much for the false hope. But I've got another opportunity. R.J. Reynolds Tobacco in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, just happens to use Adabase Natural too. Another tobacco company using the same tool. It's kind of odd. And would you be interested? Yeah, I'll be interested. A few days later, on a Thursday, I get a call. Can you start on Monday? Okay. So hang up the phone and start just scrambling to figure out how we're going to do this. I'm calling all around Winston-Salem trying to find an apartment place I could stay in. We found one. Of course, they're going to need a few days to get it ready for a new renter. Okay. Then I found a company that would actually rent a bed. It's not easy to just figure how am I going to sleep when I get there. They rented a bed with a mattress. So all I had to do is take everything else. So me and my wife, we took our 2 cars, loaded up with everything we thought we could make use of, and drove down to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, checked into a hotel, and we'd check every day, is the apartment ready? Is the apartment ready? So we're down there in time for me to go to work on Monday. The apartment didn't wind up being available till Thursday. Ooh. And money's tight at this point. So I didn't just go in and say, yeah, give us 3 nights, 4 nights. No, we did a night at a time. Every morning, Paula and me, we'd wake up, I'd go off to work, she'd go back to the car and just drive around the city. Yeah. In a strange city, it turned out to be beneficial. She learned where all the places was. Yeah. And then we'd find out, wait in the afternoon, no, apartment's not ready. Check back into the same hotel, spend the night, do that again the next day. It kind of got old, but finally by Thursday we got into this apartment. And, at RJ Reynolds, they're a nice company and all, but it's like for the first 10 days, they didn't have any work to give me. I mean, they knew I was coming. I kept thinking, why'd you hire a contractor if you didn't actually have immediate work? But for about nearly 2 weeks, I just stayed in my cubicle and I tried to read through some manuals, refresh my skills, wrote a game. I remember the thing about Natural Database that people liked was it not only could process in the background, but it could also display stuff to the screen, results. So that was really the only way companies back then, there weren't too many ways you can put something on a screen in a business for users to see. Yeah. So that's why it was brought into Brown & Williamson. I guess same thing with RJ Reynolds. So I remember writing tic-tac-toe as a game, just because it's not that much difficult logic. But anyway, and I was there. In the meantime, that airline in Indianapolis calls the Tom Glover again and says, you know what? We can have money for a new full-time employee starting in January. Or they'll have it in January. So they call me up and say that, okay, so I come home for Thanksgiving, drove up the day after Thanksgiving, which, a lot of companies, the day after Thanksgiving is just an automatic day off. Yeah. Not for airlines, because they fly a lot on those days. So You'd have to use a vacation day to be off on that day. Anyway, I go up to them on that Friday, meet with everybody again. They all seem to like it. And so after Thanksgiving, I got notified, yeah, we'd like you to come on next year. And so I worked through December at RJ Reynolds and said goodbye and came home and didn't really, I don't know what the delay was. I don't remember now, but I didn't really start till March 15th, 1994. In the meantime, between December and then, my wife and I have to go up to Indianapolis and find an apartment and a place to stay and go through all that again, which wasn't too bad. It's a 2-hour drive to Indy from here. It's like a 6-hour drive to Winston-Salem. So we found an apartment. The company was located in buildings on the airport property because they're an airline. Sure. And the closest neighborhood to the airport is the area called Speedway. And it's called that because that's where the Indianapolis Speedway is located. Found an apartment there. And for the next 2 years, it's up on Mondays, home on Fridays, Bring my laundry home with me every weekend to wash it. And it gets old real fast. But when there's just no good way to find jobs. And it was finally one day, I'm looking in the paper and there's this ad looking for an database natural programmer. And I'm thinking, okay, it's either going to be Brown & Williamson or Vermont American. I'll call anyway, who knows? Right. And ask them, okay, is this Brown & Williamson? No. Is this Vermont American? No. Hey, there's an opportunity. That's what opened the door for me to get at the company I'm at now, ARC, or Airlines Reporting Corporation, because I had that continued skill set that they needed. The person who was doing their work had moved to South Carolina, so they had to have somebody. And that's not a skill set that was easy to find because there weren't many places in Louisville using it anyway. Exactly. And that's, by the way, that technology is still out there. It's not used that much in the U.S., mostly for Department of Education entities. I don't know why. But it's still being used some. Oh, yeah, here's the tip I would tell anybody. If you're working in a particular skill set, first of all, how common is it in your area? Because if it isn't, you may wind up having to move to go find work. Secondly, are you still anybody's using it? Every great once in a while, I'll get on one of the job sites Monster.com or Indeed or LinkedIn, I'm sure there's plenty other. And I'll just put in the skills I know just to make sure people are still looking for that job. Because nowadays you just don't know when they might say,
Exactly.
thanks. I mean, that happened in my job here 3 years ago. When COVID hit, airline sales dropped dramatically.
Yes, they did.
The industry was tough. And our company at the time had decided to make the switch to putting everything in the cloud, so to speak, which was a whole different skill set. So a lot of us are going to learn a whole new set of skills. And what they decided was, you are going to interview for a new position in our new type of IT. Yeah, have to re-interview, hopefully, for a job. Well, just as they started that plan, COVID hit bad. Everybody's, out of the office now, and they couldn't make it work. So they just sat down and said, okay, here's who we're going to keep, here's who we're going to let go. And they kept me, thankfully, and they kept me. This was a job they had put out for posting called a data reliability engineer. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. I read the job description, and it sounds like you're a database administrator, which I had never done really. But it's like, so I didn't even bother applying for it. And not to speak harsh of ARC, because I'm not. I mean this, and I think what happened, the way I got that job, is they said, here's people that we know can do what we need. Here's a whole bunch of older employees who do know a lot of stuff about how we work, where the data's located. And by the way, we're still in the process of converting over. And you can't just drop one to pick the other up.
Exactly.
I mean, you got to keep doing the old stuff because it pays the bills while you convert over. So we need people that can keep the old stuff running, knows how the old data works, so that when it goes over here, we make sure it works right. So we're just going to keep all these older employees around, and we're going to give them the title Data Reliability Engineer. I've never administered a database yet in that position. It's okay. I am being useful, I feel. They give me work to do, and I do it, and I enjoy it. And ARC's been a wonderful company. When I tell a lot of people about the benefits and all that come with that job, they can't believe a job. I can't believe a job like that exists. Now, Database Natural, yeah, it's a 1980s technology. Are you still saying you're doing all of that for 41 years? No, I was lucky. At ARC, I was able to evolve into other things. I was brought in to do that. But then we brought in a database called Teradata, which is known for holding huge amounts of data.
Yes.
And so I got to learn that technology and work in that area. Then somebody came up with a brilliant idea for a product to sell to airlines. But then the amount of data that was going to be churned and chunked through to make it work was enormous. And our mainframe tools couldn't possibly. You can connect with Teradata from the mainframe, but it's slow. It can only handle so much. We need a new type of tool. So they went out there and they brought in a tool that's called an ETL tool. And that's a common term. It stands for Extract, Transform, Load. There's these specialized tools that are meant to work with huge amounts of data in certain ways. So I was on the proof of concept team and got to see how they worked. And then I got to be taught to be a developer in a technology that's still being used out there and still runs today. And because it still runs today, somebody's got to keep the wheels on it rolling. So I get pulled into that from time to time. So it's all kind of worked out. And because the conversion to the cloud, it really takes longer than you might imagine. I'm hopeful that my employment is good for at least a few more years till I want to retire,
Gotcha.
So that's the story of Tim and IT.
What do you do to keep up with the industry?
That's a good thing to know. There are, the phrase trade journal, nobody opens a magazine anymore. There are sites you can go out to where you can learn the latest in IT and where things are going. Now, granted, that doesn't mean you always want to just jump up and try to learn new technology while you're working during the day in an existing one. But there are ways you can teach yourself new stuff. For example, and I think I've told you this before, anybody who would want to get any experience working in the cloud, look, the three big cloud players, Microsoft, Google, AWS. They're not that much different from each other. You might call it this in one cloud, and you might call it this in another, but the similarities of what it does are the same. So you could learn any one of those, and I think be able to translate the skills. If you learned AWS, but somebody in Google Cloud wants to hire you, you could pick it up awfully fast. Okay. Nice thing with AWS, you can open up a free account, and you can learn on there for free. You can run things on there for free. If you've got a free account, then it's like, well, we'll let you run things over here, but you're going to be kind of limited. It's like, well,
Yeah.
if you're paying for it, we'll give you this big of a backyard.
Exactly.
If you're not paying for it, you get this big of a backyard, but you can still play in it. Okay. If you want a bigger one, you'll have to pay for it. But if you want to do everything free, you can, and you can start learning how to work in a cloud environment and and the great thing is, like with AWS, once you start learning it, if you take some certification tests and get them passed, and that says this body of knowledge, and it will open up doors. One of the big certifications is called a cloud architect. And they also have a thing called an associate cloud architect. And there was a fellow that was working on my team. He got his associate cloud architect certification, and the next day, he goes out and he posts on his LinkedIn profile. He has that. The next day, he's getting swarmed with offers, and big money too, because they're looking for people who understand that stuff. And he left the company and went somewhere else.
That was my next question.
He went to where the grass was greener, and I hope he's happy they're doing it. But there are that's one way to stay up with it, trying to see where trends are. And then you have to try and figure out what's the best tools to learn for what I'm trying to do. For example, data analytics is real big right now. Okay. Now you could go to school and learn about data analytics. You could self-study and so forth. And then what tool works best with what that's trying to achieve? Data analytics is the idea of how do I take and wade through data and find patterns and so forth. And there's a language I learned of recently. It's called R, the letter R. But it is geared towards making data analytics simpler.
Okay.
That's the whole reason new tools come out.
Yeah, of
is
course.
to make doing the same thing simpler. I can remember back in my mainframe days, and somebody said to me, I read an article where the day will come where you'll just put boxes on a screen and connect them with lines, and that'll be coding. No keyboard? And I couldn't envision how it worked. I do that now. There's more to it than just boxes on screens.
Of course.
But, there's more in the background. But really, and the development is much quicker because the boxes are components that do certain functions, and you know what that function is. I need a sort record, so I'll pull a sort component. It's a box, has the word sort in it. It's just it's faster. It's pretty easy. In the old days, you'd get a stack of computer code, you'd have to read through and take all day to figure out what's doing. This is much simpler because you can just look at it and kind of see the flow of logic. So that tool was developed to make development faster, quicker, and handle a whole lot of data.
What do you think of the impact AI is having on the industry?
It won't surprise me that programmers might still exist 10, 20 years from now, but they'll be doing something totally different. Maybe they'll just speak into a microphone, and the AI can figure out what your intent is from how you explain it. I don't know, but AI is definitely going to change coding. I know I'm using old terms like, coding still goes on today.
Of course.
I still have to go into some dinosaur systems every once in a while and literally type out code. Okay. Web developers, every once in a while, have to get in and actually type in the C++ or Java or whatever they're using, But the keyboard's probably going to become a thing like the crank automobile. It'll disappear someday. There'll be no need to type anything. AI is going to change a lot of that.
Do you use AI right now in your job?
I do not. I believe my company is exploring some uses of ChatGPT, but I don't know how. They haven't demonstrated or anything what they're doing with it. Of course, I wish them well. Just don't come into my area and do it. I want to keep my job, at least for a few years longer. After I retire. I've even said this to the president of our company. It's in your best interest to keep me as an employee, because the first place I worked for, Brian Williamson, no longer exists after they let me go. My second employer, American Transair. After I left, they no longer exist. So wherever I work, once I leave, the company goes under. So keep me around if you want to keep this business going. So I don't know what's going to happen to them after I retire.
If you went back to when you're going into college to do this, would you change anything?
I'd get into IT quicker, obviously. No, not a whole lot, you know. I mean, I can see looking back over 41 years how God has kind of had his hand on my career and helped me to go through the right steps. It's just you don't always know that's what's happening, so it's frustrating. You know, I didn't know if I'd ever get out of Indianapolis, you know,
Yeah.
and what would happen. Change anything. I must say there can be a lot of, I would even consider a trade,
Really?
like plumbing or electricity, you know. I mean, you know, I read an article just the other day. It says America has a shortage of construction workers. 650,000 positions for construction workers. But I do like what I do. I mean, you know, it's not hard. The thing I always try to warn young people, if you go into a field that requires manual work, that's all good and well in your 20s. But up in your 40s, eventually, that up and down, bending, twisting, turning gets hard. And hopefully by then you're owning a company where you're hiring 20s and 30s to do that, you know, because it's kind of a young person's thing to do all that heavy manual work. So I'm kind of glad I got more into an intellect, or say I'm where it needs to be up here
I got you.
more than in my muscles.
Especially because a lot of those are unions.
Yeah.
And we saw right now, I don't know if you've kept up with the stuff going on with UPS.
Yeah, aren't they talking strike or?
Yeah. And the normal wage person makes $49 an hour.
At UPS.
At UPS.
That's the average wage.
Yes.
What are they complaining about?
Exactly. But this was just on their new contract.
And that's
because they were
hourly.
about to
That's
go on
hourly,
strike.
right?
Yes.
So if they get into overtime, like around the holidays, they're cleaning up.
Yep.
Yeah, that's got to be tough for UPS to figure out how to do that. But I like the IT world. There is so much training of, you don't have to go to college to be good at it. I do understand why people go to college to study computer science, because you're going to get a broad depth of how computers are used across a wide spectrum. I mean, programming and IT work in a business is altogether different from maybe in an aerospace industry. Or the various industries have their own jargon, their own way of doing things, their own technologies that make most sense for them. So you can't just say IT is IT is IT.
Yeah, exactly.
It is in some senses, but it's very specialized in others. So I understand why people might go to computer science, where they can get a deep enough or a broader understanding, so that they can then decide which, or they might just take the first job they get. They stay there 6 months. It's not for me. You move on, you know.
So did anybody influence you to try to get you to go into any trades, or were you just like your parents did let you just go?
No, I was never a tradesperson. Okay. Now I had a father who was kind of like a jack of all trades, kind of. I mean, he grew up, you know, Depression time.
I got you.
Things were hard. You did it yourself. If anybody's going to do it, you don't hire somebody to do it. So, I mean, he would go up and put shingles on the roof. He would work on his own car. He would do his own carpentry. And he wasn't bad at most of it. One thing he really was not good at is drywall. But that's another story that I learned the hard way when he did some drywall in my house. That was not his forte. But he's pretty good at a lot of other things. Neither of my parents went to college. Okay. Oh, that's another thing. If you're going to go to college, have someone show you what good study habits are. Okay, if you are not prepared for God, you are going to do like I did and be lousy. 8 a.m. classes, oh, that was such a joke. I made my first 8 a.m. class, but eventually as the semester wears on, you stay out too late, you don't get up in time. I miss so many classes. To this day, every once in a while, I will still have a dream where I'm on the campus of the college, and I know I've got to get to a class for a test, and I can't remember the class is because I went there so seldom. I'm not sure if I remember what the subject is in that class, and I'm frantic. And eventually I wake up, you know, and it's just a dream. But I told you about Watterson College. I had to take Accounting 1 and Accounting 2 at Watterson College, and I learned it. So when I went back, I did go back to university later, University of Louisville later. I figured I got all these credit hours, might as well do some with it. So I switched majors to management, business, because I figured, well, that's probably good if you're going to be going into the business world. Maybe it'll help me. And I did finally get my bachelor's in that. Well, one of the courses, I had to get kind of caught up in some classes I didn't have there, and they wouldn't accept credits from Watterson. So I had to take an accounting 1 and accounting 2 class, and I took them both in the same summer. It was like 2 8-week courses back to back. So that's going to be pretty fast water. Well, I felt I knew this stuff. So I came to the first day of each class, and then I'd only come on test days. I kind of went through the book, just making sure, refreshing my memory. I passed the courses, because I'd already had them before.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't recommend that approach. Don't get me wrong. It's not the best way to do it. But I had to I had to get my GPA out. I wanted to get into the School of Business, and my GPA was lousy when I left. But the counselor pulled some strings and loopholes and got me in, and I finished out. And, I was happy with it. I can say Tim Perkins, BS in business management doesn't mean anything. It's just letters on a piece of paper.
With all of that going on, when you were living in Indianapolis, you had an apartment there, and you had a house here.
Yep. My wife definitely had to work during that time because we're making apartment payments and house payments, and my weekends would be busy coming home to fix things that had stopped working through the week or whatever.
So you're pretty much working 7 days a week.
I went to church on Sundays, and we were there at least half the Saturday nights. This is when church was 4 services a week. Okay. Wednesday, Saturday night, Sunday, and Sunday night. So it'd be a busy weekend, yes. But we were younger, thankfully. My years in Indianapolis was like ages 32 to 34. That's kind of like, even then,
No.
you're not in your 30s.
No.
You'll still have a lot of energy in your 30s. It's when you hit 40 that your biological clock will say, okay, you don't get as much energy as you used to have. It may not be drastic, but you'll start to feel the change. But fortunately, in my 30s, I still had the energy. In my 30s, I was out with the other guys playing basketball, full court.
Okay.
I wasn't thin, don't get me wrong, but I was a little husky. Less than I am now. I was husky, and I could still get them down the court for the most part. I wasn't all that good, but, I felt like I was staying active. But, those days are in my rearview mirror. Cards is big for me. I'm big on cards now.
Card games?
Yeah.
You play any sports in college? Or
No.
you play any sports in high school?
No.
No.
I don't know who your audience on this is going to be, but let's assume a lot of them are people that are in the body of Christ. They can identify this. Remember, I'm over twice your age.
Yeah.
So I go back when, and some churches are still this way, and I'm not knocking it, but there was a lot, I know an older sister one time, I was chatting with her, and she told me her preacher preached against riding a bicycle.
What?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know if it's just girls or boys and girls shouldn't ride a bicycle.
What was the logic on that?
I could only guess at it since I didn't hear him say it, but that's what she told me. So the church has been kind of stricter on young people in the past than it was now. So they really kind of de-emphasized too many extracurriculars at your school, particularly sports. Now, I will say there is a degree of wisdom in some of this. So, like in high school, I was part of the chess team. Okay, woo, But some activities in your school, like high school, that are team oriented, since you're a student, a young person, you can get really involved in the success of the team and the camaraderie of your teammates. Okay, which is great to have friends, but the bulk of them will probably not, especially today, be church-going fellas and girls. So they may want to pull you in directions you shouldn't go. And it's hard to resist when you've got close peers, teammates.
Of course.
Okay? I wasn't too threatened about what was going to happen to me in the chess club. Nobody's going to talk me into going drinking with them or something like that. Okay? You see the difference. Especially team sports. Am I saying I'm against team sports? No, I'm not against them. But I do recognize the risks that come because you don't know if your teenager has got a good head on their shoulders or they tend to be on the reckless side. I was somewhere in between. So It might have been good that I didn't get involved in team sports. So what was it? What helped during those days? I was part of the band at church. The band was sort of like, I mean, when I started in the band, we must have had 12, 15 young people in it. Okay, all roughly the same age. And it became the way for us to bond and be closer together and do more things as that kind of group. A group that hopefully will not take you in the direction that maybe out in the high school, public school system would. I was in a public school.
I got you.
So, that's why I was never in sports. I played them. I mean, when I grew up, it was during the time when kids in the neighborhood got together and played sports together. I mean, we had enough neighborhood kids. We played baseball. We played football in the fall. Basketball when we could find a court somewhere. So we did play sports as kids, just not organized sports. It seems to be a different world. I could drive through neighborhoods today and I rarely hear kids. Sometimes you see 6 or 7 kids at a basketball goal in somebody's driveway, and that's good, okay? But I don't know if there's even open fields available. I mean, we had backyards. All of our friends were like all next door to each other. Nobody had fences up. So we had a football field worth of yards. I mean, the only risk was if you ran into the tree in somebody's yard, Otherwise, you could play football. And so that's the story of my athletic career.
How strict was it? Like, was it 100% no?
It's going to depend on the parent. Okay, like you weren't supposed to go to movies. Oh, you don't go to movies. And look, I realized that the movie houses of the 20s and 30s and 40s were different. You could go and put a nickel in and stay all day long, just movie after movie. You and your girlfriend up in the back corner, and the ushers aren't around, and you're going to cause trouble for yourselves. I mean, that could happen then.
Exactly.
And that's what the preachers remembered, so that's why they're preaching again in the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, by then, tickets were getting to be a little expensive. And, if you went... if you had to look up the history on Louisville, the cinema theaters on Bardstown Road, they did an article in the paper about this recently. Looking back, they were the big movie house to go to. They had like 8 different screens, and they could hold 500 or more people in a room or whatever. It was a big deal. And you're paying too much for a ticket to mess around in back corners or whatever. You're there to watch it. Okay, so you knew it was different. It's just your parents might not know that it's different. So it's a question of whether your parents were a little lenient or were not. I mean, I was shocked one time when my dad... I've got a younger brother, Doug. Okay. You know him. Mm-hmm. And we're only 14 months apart. And Mom talks my dad into taking us to the drive-in just down the street from our house because they were showing some innocent movies. I remember there were 2 movies. One was The Shakiest Gun in the West with Don Knotts. You can't get more G-rated than that. So we went down there, put the speaker in the window, got the popcorn, the whole thing. Had a fun time. That didn't persuade us to go to other movies. I mean, Mom and Dad were trying to find ways to find a middle ground that worked. And then later, as we got to be high schoolers, we just, you have a job, you make your own money, you go off, you don't tell Mom and Dad where you're going. I pity my parents. Nowadays, I can know where my daughter is. I'm not trying to hover over her, but if I'm concerned, I can find out where she's at. I can contact her on a cell phone, all that sort of stuff. Not when I was her age. Or was it? I was married when I was 23. So prior to 23, Mom just had to pray a lot that I'm not going to get into an accident or get shot at or whatever it was. And yes, on more than one occasion, I just ran out of gas on the road. Not paying any attention, got just a few bucks in my pocket. Every once in a while I get lucky and I might coast into the gas station, before the car stops. And a few times I had to call Dad and him bring out a container of gas to get gassed up. But it's easier. I don't have to feel as worried. If you're a parent and your teenage son, see you later, 5 in the afternoon, doesn't show up to midnight, you're wondering what's going on. I know I didn't always make wise choices. I did make terrible choices. I never robbed anybody. I didn't get into too bad a situation, but I would just hang out with friends. Yes, I had friends in high school, and no, they weren't godly friends. They weren't terrible folks, but I should have been hanging around other people, probably.
I got
Yeah, I'm not an angel in my youth.
you. Nobody is.
No, nobody is. That's true. And there are things about my youth I would tell nobody.
That is true.
Because it's always hard to put it in perspective.
Yeah.
And they can't understand it, so naturally they're thinking the worst about whatever you're describing. So.
And that thing is like they weren't there.
Right.
So they don't know what was going through your head.
And they never went through that experience as their own kids.
Exactly.
You know, grow up in Depression era, you're just glad there's food on the table.
Something in my lifetime I haven't had to worry about.
Right.
In our generation.
Me neither.
How did you get the Holy Ghost?
How did I get the Holy Ghost? So I've been in the church all my life.
Okay.
And I will tell you, I remember I've told this story in church before. I was about 10 years old when the first time I ever thought I should pursue anything along that line. Sunday nights, a lot of times, they get this. So have you ever seen the Church of 4th and Magnolia?
I have not.
You got to have Brooke, or just Google it, 4th and Magnolia. You'll find this big stone cathedral church. And that's the first church I have memory of.
Actually, she might have. We went down. Was it downtown?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen it. We were walking through one of the parks, and she
well,
told
Central
me.
Park. It's
Yeah,
right across the
Central-
street. Okay. So that's my first church of memory. So I'm there, and I'm about 10 years old, and the church had, a platform up there, and then they had these, like, kneeling benches all across the front. And they've done this many times, an altar call, trying to get people. And I'd seen how it works. People go down front there, and others gather around them and try to help them. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, maybe it's time I try and do that. So they do the altar call, and I go down there to the altar, and I don't know what I'm doing. So I just kneel at the altar. Not one person approached me. I'm just there by myself feeling stupid. Because I think they were after somebody in particular in the congregation, and it wasn't this 10-year-old boy. So it goes on for, 10 minutes, and finally then church just dismissed, and I just kind of get up from there and thinking, okay. So, fast forward 2 more years. So you can't say I'm a big fan of going to the altar. But when I was 12 years old, so my brother would have been probably still 10, they were going to have a youth service at church. And we were it's still I think it's still a requirement of our band, I hope it is, that you don't play in this band if you don't have the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a spiritual function. So I'd been in the junior band, my brother and I both, for about a year and a half or so. But we weren't in the band yet because we didn't have the Holy Ghost, and they're having this youth function. And my mom, if ever there was a mother that worked for her kids, it was my mother. She'd do whatever it takes, we're her pride and joy. And so she calls up our band director, and I don't think he had there was no way he could say no. She was going to badger him to death if that's what it took for us to play in the band during that youth service. She just felt like it was important. And the Spirit broke out, and people started working with me, and I received the Holy Ghost. So as you look at the platform, I'm over on the left side where the piano is, and I'm up back in the band area, and I got a sister in this ear saying one thing and a sister in this ear saying another, and you're trying to obey them both, and you don't know what you're doing. You just, it's not the first time I sought the Holy Ghost. I guess you learn from experience. And what I didn't know was my brother Doug was on the other end of the platform. Also, people working on him. We got the Holy Ghost the same night at just about the same time. August 22nd, 1971.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's been 52 years, or soon to be 52. I can remember when people would testify, I've had the Holy Ghost 40 or 50 years, and I'm always thinking like, wow, that's a long time. How do you get to be that old? Just keep breathing, and you get to be that old.
It's better than the alternative.
Mm-hmm.
What was life like back then when you were growing up as a teenager? Because we have life like now. We have technology. We can fly across the country. We can have a phone call and talk.
We had 4 channels on TV. What do you think life was like? I mean, I'll tell you right there. Technology was not your big thing, okay? Kids are wrapped up in technology today.
Oh,
no,
yes.
not back in those days, I thought it was so cool when we got a stereo. And by a stereo, I'm talking about a big wooden piece of furniture, sits down, and it could play 33, 78, and 45s. And it had 2 big console speakers on each side. And, that was big news. We had a 19-inch color TV. I remember seeing Neil Armstrong step on the moon late, whatever night that was, July 20th, I think, 69. So I'm alive, 10 years old. And I think we had a black and white TV at that time. You know, and I can remember being down in the den below us. So technology was not big. I mean, you occupied yourself by reading books, watching TV, playing outside. At least as a kid, you did. You know, I mean, it was big news in our house when my older brother. Did you ever meet my older brother, Bill?
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, you may not remember him, or you just weren't around enough. He
Yeah.
died last November.
I did.
He was 77. Bill, Bill kind of was attracted to technology.
Okay.
And of course, he's an older adult, so he has some of the money. So he brought over a calculator he bought. $99 for a calculator that could add, subtract, multiply, divide, and do a square root. Ooh. $99. Thought it was amazing when I saw it.
Wow.
Yeah, I never, in high school, I never thought about computers or a career in IT. I remember I took a typing class. Well, I took 2 typing classes. I got to be pretty good at typing, by the way, if I don't say so myself. And then we're talking about mechanical typewriters. You know, you got to get that button down. I mean, electric typewriters didn't come along to the second class. And, you know, you got to know how to correct when you make a mistake and how to do your margins. And you learned all that. But it was good. I had no idea I was going to go into IT, which at that time was very typing intensive. So, you know, I've seen guys who are coders who good with 2 fingers, and they're all over that keyboard. I couldn't have done that. So, you know, maybe God had me take. I thought I was going to be typing college reports while I studied medicine. Never used it for that, of course. Did have to use it for a resume, of course.
Of course.
Thing. So I'm glad I learned typing, but computers were never on my mind.
Do you think that Neil Armstrong actually stepped on the moon?
Absolutely. I don't have any problem believing that we sent a man up there. I mean, I am not a space junkie, but I am fascinated by space facts and things. By the way, if anybody ever wants to see an excellent series on the Apollo program, it's called From the Earth to the Moon. It's a 9-part series. It's not documentary style. It's live action acting style. Tom Hanks is executive producer, and I've got the DVD collection of it. You can watch it on HBO Max. If you just want to know what Apollo was like, it does a great job telling that story.
I got you.
So yes, I do believe they figured out how to get a rocket clear up there and land a man on the moon, bring him back.
Because there's a lot of people that will disagree with you. I said, if they did it back then, why haven't they done it again?
Well, why did they stop it? See, they landed in 1969. They ended the Apollo program in 1972. Mm-hmm. You know why?
Why?
Money. It's terribly expensive to send people to the moon. Why do you think SpaceX has developed reusable rockets?
Exactly.
Because back then you send it up there, it drops, burns up in the atmosphere, drops in the ocean, sinks, things like that. Yeah, it was. I mean, granted, by today's dollars, it doesn't sound expensive, but it was a terribly expensive program to maintain. And what are we getting for it? Rocks. Okay. What questions are we really answering? Well, where did the moon come from? Did it come from us? Did we capture an asteroid? What's on the moon besides rocks? And of course, even today they theorize, well, we could be living on the moon because there's this unseen mountains of ice, so to speak, down in craters that could be tapped in for water. And they think that there might be a lot of gold under the moon's surface, but they don't really know. I'm just saying money was the big reason they stopped it. So, and you got to convince people it's hard to convince them, hey, why don't we go back to that moon, that place we went to, and get some more rocks? I could see why it's hard to persuade them to do it. You got to have a bigger reason, which is all the more reason why I understand man's desire to go to Mars and the thrill of it. But in the end, I don't see that we'll get anything out of going to Mars. They want to put a space base on the moon so they can launch from there.
We'll get red rocks.
Huh?
We'll get red rocks.
Yeah. We'll find out they're really red or what it is. And I will go on record saying this. Here's why the scientific community is spending all this time and money and energy to get to other planets and so forth. They're trying to kill God. Now, I'm going to explain that statement. The minute you can find life of any kind on some other planet, asteroid, whatever, you would say, well, see, there's proof. Nature can create life, and therefore they can kill God. We didn't come from God. You know, it was they've done experiments where they have put certain ingredients like in beakers and run an electric charge through it, and they somehow pop out an amino acid. And then that becomes the basis of, see, it starts there and then it builds into proteins. Life is too complicated. If anybody takes the time to study biology and look at life, it is way too. I know you say, yeah, but there's so many trillions and trillions and trillions of planets out there. We're that one in a gazillion that had happened. But it's worked out too perfectly.
Yes.
Why isn't only one plant developed or one animal? But when you look at all the types of species that have existed, it took an intelligent designer. Now, I will say something controversial here if you like. I don't have a problem if the way God did it was through a Big Bang. And letting all the way science explains how all the planets formed and star systems and all that. And I don't have a problem if that's how God actually did it. And here's why I say that. I'm a programmer. I write programs that have to consider all kinds of possibilities that might upset the program. How do I end it gracefully if something comes in wrong? What if the information's wrong? What do I do when it's right? I have to consider a lot of things when I write a program. And I can tell you, God's a lot better programmer than me. He could literally set things up and just simply hit the start button and let it make it so. Are you saying we evolved from a monkey? What if we did? Would that really be the worst thing? Okay, could God have designed a process that started with an amoeba into multicellular organism, into a fish, into something that crawled onto the land, the story of Genesis says God in each one of these days is creating some class of something.
Yeah.
First he's doing stars and planets, and then he's got grasses and plants coming up. Then he's got animals, and finally humans and all. You can look at those as stages. And I don't care if God said, I'm just going to have it go that way and I'll give science. I think God sometimes likes to give science something to work with to show that mankind would really like to, kill God.
Of course.
But he can build his process to come out any old way. He made mankind. He didn't just make a pair. He made all the races at once. And the more I think, if you will really think, get prejudices and preconceived ideas out of your mind. If God only made two people, Adam and Eve, okay, and of course, everybody pictures them in whatever race they are.
Yeah.
Like I see Adam and Eve as two white people. Well, that doesn't mean they were two white people. They were two people, whatever. 6,000 years ago. And you're going to tell me that 6,000 years has been long enough for all of mankind to develop into all the races there are? You haven't studied biology. Yes, things change. We've got fish down in lakes inside of Mammoth Cave here in Kentucky, where the fish have no eyes. Why don't they have any eyes? They don't need eyes. It's totally dark all the time. They evolved to drop off things they weren't using. Okay? So I do believe creatures can modify themselves over time. I think evolutionists like to say it's like survival of the fittest. If mankind first started off with no arms, then here comes along men with arms. Well, they're probably going to beat the men with no arms because they're both fighting for the same food.
Whoa.
So the best thing survives and the others don't necessarily.
Survival of the fittest.
Okay, survival of the fittest kind of idea. So things change over time. I don't think it's a problem for God to create all the races at the same time. We have the bones of Neanderthals. We have the bones of Homo afronesis, or whatever it's called, out of Africa, and Homo erectus, and all those different species. We've got their bones. Why are they here? I suspect they lived. Are there people who really think dinosaurs didn't exist? When you can find all these great big skeletons and piece them together, I think they existed. Okay, I know I don't think they're on Noah's Ark or destroyed a flood. But if we've got their bones, those creatures existed. It sounds to me like man is slowly evolving over time. I think the story of Adam and Eve says mankind finally got to a point where God can now work with him. He's intelligent to understand right from wrong. I don't think God could have a relationship with Neanderthals. They just weren't at the point in development where a God could work with them and them understand what he is. So I have no problem if we actually evolved that way. Now, if we didn't go that way, I don't have a problem with it either. Now, keep in mind, we didn't all come from Adam and Eve. We all came from Ham, Shem, and Japheth and their wives. Them, with Noah and his wife. They're the 8 that got saved after the flood. So regardless of what went on before the flood, from Adam up to the flood is like, 1,500 years? So actually, we've only been around, if the Bible's accurate, we've only been around for 4,500. And I haven't really noticed a big change in mankind since the time of Christ. So from 4,500 BC and whatever Noah and Ham, Shem, and Japheth were, whatever they look like, to the time of Christ, all them races are going to develop in 4,500 years. That actually doesn't make good sense on a scientific level. That's why you can have all kinds of theories on how did this happen. And I'm good with a lot of them, is what I'm saying. When I get to heaven, I'm going to have a lot of questions. How did you really do it? Come on, tell me. And those who like to stick strictly Bible, go ahead. You might be right. I don't know what the right answer is. I'm just glad he chose to save me.
That's right.
It is a little sad sometimes when we think about how many people have lived and died on this earth who never knew anything about God and his plan.
Yep.
What am I so special? Am I just the lucky one who's in the right place at the right time? I had 2 parents that happened to encounter Brother William Souders' ministry, and they found each other, and then, boom, I come along later down the road, and they're still in church.
Well, always when we talk a little bit with some of our friends, and we said, well, God doesn't work in happenstance. Like,
No, I don't think he does. I have heard preachers talk about, it's not all set in stone what's going to happen to you. Your time is always, that Jesus said to his disciples. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a misleading statement, I think. In their mind, their time is always, because they don't know when they're going to die. But God does. He knows the exact circumstance, the exact second you'll take your last breath. And I think he's got a plan, and he's going to work it out for, as long as we stay on the path, working with God, we're doing good. If I veer off the path, clearly I'm not in good shape. Could I be shortening my time here on earth? God can keep me alive regardless of how bad my health is. And if he's doing that, thank you. Okay? But God could also be saying, Tim, if you just be a little healthier, I think you'd reach your final stage by 74. But the way you're going to have a heart attack at 69 and die. So I think we all have to be conscious. Let's not get in our own way, but stay on the path. Let God work us through. And I think he can get us to the finish line of what we need to become as a person, as long as we're willing to change, of course.
That's the kicker.
That's the kicker, being willing to change.
There was a saying that is it hard to teach an old dog new tricks?
It isn't, and it isn't. What the hard part is the life lessons the old dog has already learned that he knows he can count on, versus here's this new thing, and is it worth the risk of making a change to it, or is it worth the risk of going to this instead of this? It's true of everything in life.
Of course.
You trust what you know. Mm-hmm. That has proven itself.
Yeah. It's hard to try something different because it's the unknown.
And it's also, you get older, for some people it can be hard to build new memories. Like we've been talking about IT, learning new skill sets. I was fortunate that even when I started my first job, one of the languages I had to learn, because it was great for doing statistical analysis on data and spitting out reports. It was called SAS. Now, SAS, as I understand, is still around, not in the way I learned it, but because of the way it worked, when I had to start, you don't know SQL, do you? Okay, it's a very popular language as far as querying a database. It's got a whole standard form about it. SQL was not hard for me to grasp because of my SAS learning. If I had not taken SAS, if I just went through the traditional programming method, SQL was harder to learn. So I've been fortunate to have been put in positions to have the capacity to learn new things, but that capacity is becoming more limited now.
I got you.
I do find myself now sometimes struggling for a word. Names have always been elusive. I'll never forget your face. I can move from Louisville and see you again in 30 years and I'll recognize you. Might not remember your name. But
I'm the
now
same
it's
way.
getting to where sometimes I'm trying to think of a person's name. I see their face. I know this person. Why can't I think of their name? Or the right word for something. It's like, oh, and
Yeah.
it finally comes to me a couple of minutes later. But it concerns me. My memory's getting like that. I had an aunt, sweet lady. She was my mother's sister. She was also in the church. And she's been dead now for about 25 years. And she spent the last 3 years of her life in a nursing home. And her memory was going. And she clearly, you can come in, she could forget what she said 10 seconds ago. But she had all kinds of old memories she could tell you. But her short-term memory was terrible. When did you get here, Isaac? He'd been standing right in front of her for 10 minutes or something like that. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm headed that way. I don't know if I've got proteins building up my brains, heading towards Alzheimer's.
What is some advice you would give, say, 18 or 19-year-old going into the IT industry? What's some advice that you would give them?
Not every IT is a nice industry, and it can give you a good. You need to figure out if you've got the skill set for it. Now, they say there are aptitude tests out there that can judge where you lean towards mentally. Maybe let's face it. There are people who are artistic, but they couldn't figure out the logic for a computer to take. So I would recommend, first of all, see if you're even got the basic skills, basic thinking for IT work. Make sure that's a field you could succeed in. Okay? Then you're going to decide, is college the right thing for me or not? Some people college doesn't work for them. Doesn't mean they have to go into a trade or anything. It just means college and the structure of college may not work well. There's so much more training available that you can take on your own and become skilled at IT work. So college may be better in the long run if you can go that route. A computer science program, I think, is the best exposure. I say that, and yet I never got a computer science degree. This is all kind of on guesswork from my interactions with people who studied it. I think a computer science degree can be very helpful for you. But since so much of our world is going into IT, I don't know what the job market's going to be like. Whatever you do, don't go get an IT degree at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, these elite schools, because they're not going to teach you anything more than you can't learn at a local school for half the price or more. It's ridiculous how expensive college kids coming out of college with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt.
Yep.
And then they studied French literature to get that. And they wonder why they can't pay their student loans back. And then they think the government should step in and pay them back. Look, I took out student loans. I got my degree. I went to work. I paid off my student loans with the job I got from getting my education. So you need to be practical when you think about what you're going to do for a living and what it might cost you to get there. You can learn to be very effective in IT. But I will put in another plug. You can make good money in trades. Carpentry, plumbing, electricity, HVAC. All those things, by the way, take a knowledge base. Carpentry is not just knowing how to swing a hammer. There's a lot of mathematics and know-how into how to properly frame a house. You ever done any framing?
A little bit.
Okay, so you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, you can't just say, where do I nail this board? You got to know something about any one of those trades, and they will pay you for your knowledge as well as your physical output.
You got to know the requirements, what the code is in that industry.
You got to know those codes.
How to build a house, how far it has to be apart, a foot, it has to be 2 feet. There's a lot of things.
There's a lot to know. So, IT, I guess, I can see where IT is attractive, particularly for those who are more, I don't want to say cerebral, but they get into math and engineering and that kind of thinking. So I understand the attraction, and it may be the best field for you. But there are many ways you can get through that path. It's not just computer science at a college. And if college doesn't work for you, there are certainly other training ways you can learn it. I know my company each summer brings on about 8 interns from local colleges who then, I think they're mostly computer science majors. So they come in, they get real world experience. They see in my case, it's business IT. And you get an idea of how business IT works. You know, gone are when I started working, yes, it was a whole big floor full of cubicles. And you were in your own little cubicle and somebody came in and said, need this, hand down, and you go to work like that. It's much more collaborative these days. For one reason, they realized the more that the developers can collaborate with the business user and so forth, the more they understand the broader picture of what they're asking for, because sometimes they ask too small. And you know that, well, you're trying to solve this problem, not this one. And by collaborating with them, you can see the bigger picture and you can be more helpful to them. And the way they do the IT work, the what's called the SDLC, System Development Lifecycle. There's a whole bunch of older ones that many companies still stick to, but there's newer ways they do it today that allow you to produce stuff quicker and more and better, because it's tested sooner, and whatever you've gotten done so far, you know that works, and then you add to it. And so it's a kind of a whole nother way of working, and I don't know if they teach that in schools or not, so it's good to get that kind of exposure. And if you're in a computer science program, it could be they have internships. You might ask, can I intern in my senior year or whenever with other businesses to learn how it actually, there's the learning it, and then there's the real world application.
Was it OJT? On the job training?
Yeah.
But
And there's plenty of that too. You don't come out knowing everything. Talk to the older people. Find out some of the old ways of doing it.
that is true.
I was talking with a fellow we hired about 15 years ago. He's since left the company. And for those of you who are in IT, you might recognize this. If you say the word ASCII today, everybody understands what ASCII means if they work in IT. Say the word EBCDIC. These are technical terms. Mm-hmm. Most of them have no clue what that means. And I explained to him because it was important for what he was doing to understand it. And no, I'm not going to get into that. You can Google those things, okay? ASCII is ASCII and EBCDIC is EBCDIC. And it'll explain all what that is. But that's an old dinosaur term, but sometimes it's applicable. And they probably don't even cover it in school. But sometimes the older folks can tell you about some of that, particularly if it applies to that particular IT shop.
Sure. I got you.
I can't give all the best experience, you know, and I can't say go. If you're going to go into IT, you're probably going to code in something. You're going to have to learn to write code in something for a purpose.